Good afternoon. We're going to begin our lunch panel discussion. And as one of our attendants just said, this is probably the largest panel we've ever convened at FIU, but as you'll find out in a moment that we need every single one of these perspectives. Former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, once said, "People of different religions and cultures live side by side in almost every part of the world. And most of us have overlapping identities, which unite us with very different groups. We can love what we are without hating what and who we are not. We can thrive in our own tradition even as we learn from others and come to respect their teachings. One of the most powerful ways we learn from others is through dialogue with diverse others, exchanges of ideas, both at home and abroad. All of our student panelists today have engaged in dialogue that enabled them to cross borders of difference, whether physical or psychosocial. They're going to share with us the varied ways that they have prepared for, engaged in, and learned from these dialogues. I'm honored to introduce our distinguished panel of discussants. You can see their full biographies in the program. First, we have Tracy Argueta, Psychology and Criminal Justice, Sabrina Beydoun, a biology student, Malvis Campbell, who studies marine biology, Anna Lemos, who is a graduate student in environmental studies. We have Mark Hodgson, who is the director of our Model UN. He also is a double bachelor in poli-sci and international relations, minoring in Spanish. There's other certificates in there as well. I'm not going to go into the rest. We have Camila Uzcategui, who is a double major in biophysics and anthropology. We have Carla Valdez, criminal justice. And of course, I skipped Alejandro Pereda Shulgun, who is a recent graduate of FIU's International and Intercultural Education Master's Program. And we have Rosa Villa, who is a student of philosophy and political science. And leading our discussion today is our moderator, the many-talented Vice President of Marketing and Communications, Terry Witherell. Torpedo Terry's creativity and energy as a communicator knows no bounds. Literally. I am her Facebook friend, and I can attest to the fact that Terry is truly a dynamo. Most status updates are of something wonderful she and her husband have done recently, like cooking or a beautiful vegetable that they've grown, but most Saturday mornings, I awake to this photo. And the question, keep going? She's ridden 50 miles or more before I've even had my first cup of coffee. And we couldn't think of a better person to lead us in a discussion about discussions crossing borders than Terry. So, after we make sure that we can hear her, she's going to take it away.
Wardrobe malfunction.
A little wardrobe malfunction. Take it away, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, august panel guests, Drs. Doscher and Landorf. I'm a fan of global learning, always have been. As the brand lead at FIU, it's very exciting to see global learning for global citizenship as our QEP. Nothing dovetails more appropriately with our Worlds Ahead brand. I don't think there's going to be a lot of shyness on today's panel, so let's jump right in. Impress the guests with your perspectives and knowledge, and play off of each other as we discussed. Let's start with asking you what kinds of discussions enhanced your global awareness, perspective, or engagement. These could be personal, in the classroom, in your study groups, or since you've become friends this morning among each other.
Here we are. She couldn't get us to shut up over lunch, and now all of a sudden
I know.
nobody wants to talk.
Come on, guys.
So I guess I'll start out. I'm involved with the Model United Nations program here on campus, and I guess it's part of my major as an international relations major. It's obviously something very inherent in my major. We're constantly discussing global perspectives. And oftentimes, though, instead of talking about culture, we're talking about interstate balances of power, or theory behind why the world works as it is. That doesn't necessarily touch on opening your mind to new cultures or changing your normative assumptions about how the world works or how cultures work. What really has changed my perspective has been interacting with other students from this university and discussing issues of contention that come up in everyday lives here. So for instance, one of our students that's on the team, Adnan Sama, is Congolese and a devout Muslim. And recently, he's the student imam of the local, the student Muslim group here on FIU's campus, which is great. These are the kind of perspectives that really lend to us getting out and knowing new cultures and new people. Recently, there was an update that they'd found a microphone in their student prayer center here on campus, and of course, we don't know where that's coming from. And as Adnan is sitting with us on our team and as a personal friend to all of us, we now get the opportunity to really delve into something new and unique. As a fellow student at FIU and as a Model UN delegate, all of our delegates are discussing things of what are the cultural norms that we have regarding our privacy, and do those extend to people, with different, across boundaries? And so these are, I guess, the discussions that I benefit the most from here at FIU are because of the interaction between cultures. And that's the kind of thing that if we can promote openness to those discussions in classrooms, and maybe take time out of, I know many of you are teachers and you have a curriculum that you have to follow. But when issues of contention or cultural struggles come up, taking a little moment and having a conversation about it with everyone really benefits, I think, everyone, both for understanding the other person's culture and to develop respect for maybe some of the aspects that aren't taught in aspects of our culture which aren't taught in curriculums. So,
how about somebody with an in-classroom example?
So the global learning class that I took that was also part of my major was World Ethnographies. And it really showed not only across the board in different parts of the world, but how culture changes here in the United States. So we were exposed to different practical ways that culture is invoked here in the United States. We were able to read a book that was about a culture in the inner city of New York, and it really showed how it differed and how their experiences really kind of shaped and molded their point of view. And that's not only the case in this particular place in New York, but it's the case all over the world. So we were able to have a discussion about how our cultures and the persons that we are and the points of view that we have are truly shaped by all of these experiences that we've had, from growing up in a specific area to having the education and having the specific majors that we've had. So I think those discussions really invoked an understanding of global dynamics that I've never had before.
One of my classes that Professor Riak teaches, Indigenous Conflict in the Andean Amazon, I think every single class except for one, we've actually had teleconferences with people in Peru, people who are working on these issues that can give us this real world experience. We also had someone from Colombia, from one of the indigenous federations, come to our class and actually sit with us as opposed to just, lecturing. We have, I guess the American school system is, the professor stands in front and we, the lowly students, sit and bask in their amazing glory, and it flipped a little bit. It flipped the dynamic. And in my personal experience, since this person comes from an indigenous background, indigenous worldview, completely different from, the Western mentality that we are completely separate from our surroundings. We need to conquer it, and I made a comment about, trying to understand what their worldview was, and he just flat out was like, no. I mean, it was embarrassing for me in class because I didn't want to offend this person, but at the same time, by just putting the brakes, in the middle of class and not and as equals. That's what I appreciated it a lot about it, is that, you know, even the people working in these fields that have been working for decades, you know, it's this sense of community that we all have, that we're all working on the same thing. And, you know, there's physical boundaries. People can't come here, we can't go there. But with these teleconferences and even video conference, last night we had a video conference with people from the Field Museum in Chicago. I mean, it was a different dynamic because now we could see them. And I've been learning a lot this semester about how to deal with different cultures, different worldviews, and how, you know, this Western idea that we need to conquer the world, and, you know, because globalization is not just the United States or the Western idea coming in and showing everybody that they're wrong. You know, we have this preconceived notion that that's what it is, when in reality it's just learning about each other and learning that, you know what, there's no right answer to solving problems. You know, it's a mix, it's an integration of all these things. So.
Something as subtle as just seeing somebody can make such a really substantial difference in the way that you receive the information from them. Yeah, I saw the gesture there.
So for me, some of the experiences that I've had, the discussions that have really helped me understand, I guess, diverse perspectives have come from the classroom, especially in my criminal justice classes, but those discussions are always ones that were not part of the curriculum. So right after the Trayvon Martin shooting, my professor for global terrorism engaged the entire class and dedicated that entire class to discussing the different perspectives. FIU is very diverse. We have students of lots of different backgrounds, from both economically, racially, ethnically, and even just family upbringing. And so being able to discuss it and to discuss the media and what their influence on it was, I completely changed my perspective on what I thought of that entire situation. And in addition, I've had similar experiences in a class that I took last semester, comparative criminal justice systems, being able to talk about why is our criminal justice system in the United States the way that it is, and why is Saudi Arabia's, or what we know of it, the way that it is, and being able to appreciate the differences and the reasons that their system is different from ours and why ours is different, and being able to see the good and the downfalls of both or all sides of it. And so I find that if it's outside of the curriculum, taking current events, things that are happening, and exploring everyone in the classroom's perspective, and just setting up boundaries that say we respect each other's opinions, has really been some of the best experiences I've had in the classroom.
I wanted to mention a little bit, coming more from the theoretical field of actual international education. Teaching students to be, to be of the world, to be international, to perceive the world is a little bit difficult inherently, especially in the K through 12 education, because most of the national systems of education, including the United States and all of the countries, are designed to instill in the person the patriotic feeling that I am from this country. I need to, in every country we sing, the national anthem at the beginning of the day. So teaching about the world often creates a duality. Person doesn't understand what he's becoming a citizen of this country, or he is learning about the world. And especially in the United States, what we've been seeing throughout research, and especially in everyday experience, that people who come here are most of the time a subject of being Americanized. They are required to only speak English in their schools. Not that much in Florida, but if you go a little bit upper in Texas, in Georgia. So it's hard for its teachers within the curriculum of public schools and even in the college to implement the kind of thing. So I believe what every one of my fellow panelists mentioned, every opportunity that we have, video conferences, role plays, is all in little by little going to, improve the situation with the teaching within schools. And I believe what FIU is doing, global learning for global citizenship, actually a great example of an institution that is focusing on, providing students with the perspective that are outside of the, national curriculum of only, centered in the U.S. cases of education.
Anybody else? Yeah, that was.
Okay, all right, good. I am a marine bio major, and I agree with everyone here. But for me, as a science major, it was that one track mentality. As America is, we industrialize, we come to other countries, we enforce our way of living onto other countries. So for me to take a global learning class when I first came to FIU as a transfer student, I was like, what is a global learning? Why am I taking it? You're wasting my time. This is irrelevant because all I care about is research, getting in the lab, and doing my work. The same way as America's like, well, I don't care about any other country. I just want to come here, grab your stuff, take your stuff, and leave. So when I first started taking the global learning last semester as a Marine Reserves class, the first thing Professor Kuyata taught us was, don't just think about America. Think about Europe, Africa. What goes on in America affects the rest of the world in terms of the environment, in terms of the marine life in itself. So once she started saying that, then everybody in class, including me, was like, oh, so we have to think outside of Gulf of Mexico, Florida. All right, okay. Maybe Europe. Okay, so and after, days go on in class and class kept going, we kind of get to figure that, okay, so maybe, this oil spill here that happened in BP in Florida yes, it was horrible, but it's just not a Florida problem now. It's now a European problem. Now it's an Africa problem. Now it's a South America problem. So the fact that I was able to take this global learning class, even though in the beginning I was like, I don't care about global learning. I just want to get in, get my degree and get out because I need to start doing my research. It actually brought in my horizon saying, okay, so maybe I should be more pay attention to the fact that what's going on with the political standpoints that maybe they're building that oil rig over in Alaska. What's the implications that's going on with Alaska that could affect Russia, that can affect Canada, that can affect the Pacific Ocean, the currents that go into Central and South America? What is the environmental aspect on that? What is the damage to them that can be caused into an international problem that's no longer just an American problem, it's an international problem, and we have to consider other people in other countries' aspects of what's going on.
Brilliant. Similar to the tsunami debris coming ashore. Not only possibly anticipating that, but understanding there needs to be a dialogue to help mitigate damage moving forward between countries. So if there's a standard culture of peaceful negotiation, we can help each other solve environmental problems as well as human problems and political problems.
So before starting my undergraduate career in FIU, I expected to have a sort of curriculum with self-entitled Americans, if you will, who have a really misguided sense of entitlement because they're American, and there is an emboldening sense of courage and pride in being part of the United States, so you sort of have blindfolds to the international sphere. But I was very much wrong by anticipating this, because the beauty about FIU classes is that it is so multicultural and diverse. What does that mean? That people want to know your struggle. They want to know exactly where you're coming from, which means what background you experienced before coming into the university, where you were born, how you lived, and what you lived. Students here are really eager to know the world. And that's what I think a lot of universities, particularly maybe in the Midwestern sphere of the United States, is missing. That diversified kind of perspective. We don't think linearly. It's been my fortunate experience to not have dealt with students that think linearly, because we have students from Angola, we have students from Cambodia, from Cuba, from all sorts of, all parts of South America. So now you're not thinking within this sort of misguided mentality that everything that happens in the United States is all that matters. No, you start looking outside, because you know that what happens outside affects your domestic life and vice versa. And I think that that's something that universities should definitely keep implementing in their curriculum, because if not, you lose integrity and you lose a sense of actual deep thinking that you only get with people with different ideas and different cultural backgrounds. So I hope that other models follow FIU's model.
As a biology major, I kind of shared a similar experience to Malvis. So throughout my curriculum, I really focused a lot on the sciences, understanding the reasoning behind things. And as far as how it extended globally, we learned about the ecology of different places and things of that sort, but it never really dove into culture and how an environment directly will affect the culture that springs from that environment. And so as part of my curriculum, I had to take a global learning course, as a lot of people have mentioned. And so I took introduction to sociology. And that class really taught me a lot in terms of recognizing the fact that what we perceive as a norm here is not necessarily going to be the same elsewhere. And I had never been outside of the United States at this point, so that was something that was very difficult for me to understand and appreciate. So after I took that class, I really left with a lot more appreciation for cultures around the world, and just understanding that what we see here, what we know here, is not going to stand true for everywhere else around the world. And so after that, that kind of helped me to relate what I would learn through my sciences and how it would affect cultures. And I think that that's something really important. And when we relate global things to whatever it is that we're studying, it allows us to expand on it and see different options as to how we can grow in that field. So for example, now I may be thinking about biology, and when I graduate, how can I apply this field internationally as opposed to just here in the United States?
More within the classroom, I think to touch on what Tracy talked about, having this atmosphere where there's kind of non-judgment, I think that's really beneficial in certain circumstances. Different people learn different ways, though. For me, what I've realized, and for a lot of people that I know, we really get motivated from competition. So we want to have a competitive framework within the classroom. And that's maybe Rosa, I think, as somebody who wants to be a lawyer, probably feels the same way about certain things, and I'm sure other panelists here feel that way. And one way to do that is to find a way to maintain the respect for people's opinions and for their persons, while still providing a competitive framework for them to engage in global topics. So there's a couple of instances I can give for this. Many of them are kind of role-play simulation type scenarios. So in my international law class that I'm taking right now, we're given cases from the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which are real cases. So for instance, next week I'll be defending Bashar al-Assad and 9 counts of crimes against humanity. And there will be a prosecution that's attempting to indict him in the International Criminal Court. So, and this is the type of thing where maybe this isn't the global learning that we want, right? We don't want people being sympathetic to crimes against humanity, but it requires you to think from his perspective. And the United States tends to have this, I think, this moral assumption that everything that we do in the world is right, or at least for noble purposes. Maybe our means are a little bit sullied, but our ends are always noble in the end. And of course, the Syrian government doesn't feel that way at all. They see themselves as the victim here. So when I have to go and defend and do all my research on, it brings the questions about, well, the U.S. has kind of done some of these things too, and we haven't been indicted. So, and that makes you question the underlying power dynamics in the world and how those impact the global system. So that really forces you to question your normative framework about the world. And doing it in a competitive, interactive environment, I think really, really stimulates student engagement and critical thinking, which should be, I think, some of the goals of a global learning education. So
would you find that the safe, competitive, but safe dialogue and learning makes you more competitive, makes you more aggressive for the right reasons, not
Yeah, I think it makes, at least I can speak to myself personally, and I can speak to what I've seen with my students as director of the Model United Nations team. I can see changes in people over the course of a semester or two. They'll go from passive recipients of knowledge to active engagers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to adopt a specific normative framework about the world. They aren't going to say that they may not adopt American system of norms. For instance, Adnan, the student I mentioned, who's a devout Muslim, isn't going to abandon his norms. He believes very strongly and with reason that the Quran is the ultimate source of morality in the world, and we're not trying to force him to change that. So what we have to do is to make sure that we don't do ad hominem attacks, and this is common sense stuff. and we don't argue. I guess we argue the points and not the people. And I think that's very feasible, and that's something that every professor and every teacher can do in the classroom. There's no
During the
reason.
situation, not just the person.
Right,
or the
and it just requires a certain level of research. So maybe combining a simulation with some background teaching, so spending a few classes discussing whatever topic you want to discuss about and teaching the students that information. And if they know that they have to do a simulation on day 3 or day 4, that motivates them to pay attention during those 3 days of lecture, right? Because if there's no accountability for them to get interactive, or if they're not going to be, I hate to say humiliated, but but when you're presenting an argument and if you don't know your stuff, it's humiliating in front of the class. So that adds a little bit of pressure for students to learn, and it keeps it exciting and interesting for them. So I've found that my best experiences here at FIU in the classroom have been interactive experiences where we're doing simulations, competing against other students, and that's how I think it's benefited me in more ways than one. So.
To add to what Mark had to say, because we do come from similar backgrounds. I was a Model UN delegate his first semester in Model UN. I'm also involved in the debate club, in mock trial, and what I do see a lot of are international students who have thick accents and have very strong and firm beliefs, right, that they've brought from their nations. And I think the best way to cultivate competition in a safe way is to encourage and embrace the accents, right? To encourage and embrace differences in opinion, and not to, make someone feel as if, or a student particularly, who wants to learn and wants to adapt and assimilate to the American way of living. You want them to say it's okay for you to hold on to your roots. And it's okay to have an accent. In fact, that's what makes you such a strong speaker. And that's what makes the audience want to listen to you. That you don't sound exactly like the person who came before you. And from the Model UN perspective, a lot of delegates want to listen to you because you remind them of you, because they remind you of them, because they remind you of yourself, which is just, maybe an anomaly, a cultural anomaly. When I would compete with Mark, we had we had a student from Haiti, an incredible activist from Haiti, and he had a very thick Haitian accent. And he struggled with the language quite a bit, but there was so much passion in what he had to say. And the language barrier, I don't know how, but it sort of reinforced that passion. It made everyone want to listen to him, because when he talked about genocide, and when he talked about poverty, and when he talked about infant mortality, we all realized he experienced it firsthand. And that accent, that language barrier strengthened that point. So I think that to encourage an open dialogue and to encourage healthy competition, we want students to embrace their roots, and we want students to embrace these anomalous characteristics that they bring from their backgrounds. That's the only way to make a dialogue count and to make it all-inclusive and comprehensive.
So this type of arrangement and environment doesn't allow you to hold others at arm's length any longer. It forces you to, when you're ready and as you're ready, to accept and assimilate those differences. So talk to me a little bit, about the struggle personally you may have had with an issue that you may have been absolutely sure you knew exactly where you stood on this until that epiphany, that experience that may have changed your life for the first time forever, because there'll be many more.
Good afternoon. I can personally speak about that on a very high level because I just came from studying abroad. It wasn't that I was placed in a place where I was completely out of my comfort zone. I actually felt like I was too comfortable. I was in my home country, Argentina. So I felt like it was going to be a new experience, getting to know my roots all over again. But I was hit by a very big wall when you start meeting people from all over the world. Just like you come from the United States. Yes, South Florida has a lot of Hispanics, and okay. So you get there and you meet people from Delaware or Maryland, and you're just like, oh, hi, yeah, I'm from the US as well. And you start to learn how different people from your own country can be. Being out there, you're faced with different cultures, just different personalities. And putting all of that together, coming back home, I'm taking human trafficking. And that class couldn't be any more diverse than anything else because we cover everything in the world about what's going on. And I feel like my experiences from talking to people in Argentina from all over the world, not just the United States, being able to compile everything together and bringing it back to the classrooms here makes the discussion that we have in class, since it's completely funded by discussion, that is what the class is about, and bringing all of those ideas, I feel like you never know who you're sitting next to. You'll never really know all the layers that a person can withhold. And global learning are those classes that entitle you to open your mind into every type of perspective and never feeling sure about anything, always wanting to know that there's more out there that you can always like step on. So.
I found that my perspective and my opinion was challenged on my first trip with alternative breaks to the Dominican Republic. We were working with disadvantaged children. I was born in El Salvador and I was there till I was 6. There's pervasive poverty. Had friends whose didn't, their houses were made of mud, the floor is dirt, and we would play in it. There was no plumbing, there was no electricity. So going to the Dominican Republic, before I got there, I thought I understood poverty, and I thought I knew that there wasn't too much you could do about it, and that it was an issue that was there. It was great that we were going, but I kind of underestimated the difference. But it was very different going back as an adult who was in college, who was being challenged to think outside the box and to think critically and work directly with kids who were affected by poverty. We did an assortment of projects and activities with them, and by the end of the week, these kids were saying, thank you for coming. I want to be like you. I don't have parents, I'm an orphan, but I want to have my own little business now, and I want to do this. And they had these aspirations, and then some of the members had gone on that trip more than 5 times, 6 times in a row, so 6 years of this. And some of those kids had really come out of poverty to an extent, and they were pursuing goals. They were productive citizens. A lot of those kids normally resorted to selling drugs, for instance, to support themselves. And many of them came to this program doing that, left it, and started their own businesses or got real jobs. And we did something about the poverty. And every time that we went, the group went, they said, you've contributed to this, you've fundraised, you've helped us with donations, and you've done these projects that instill a sense of knowledge, a sense of hope for these kids, and you keep coming back, and they hold on to that, and it's important in their progress. And so I realized that my whole life I had thought of poverty the wrong way. Maybe the feat of completely ending poverty all at once very quickly is not realistic, but that you can end poverty in a person's life or in a small community, and you can help them come out of it, is completely realistic, completely doable, and it happens, and you just have to go out there and do it. And so I think that's something that needs to be incorporated more into classes, because we tackle a lot. Global learning is important, and we're doing it excellent, but I think that global learning is also talking about the very individual and specific instances in each country that you're talking about. So when we're teaching or when we're learning about an issue that's going on, say, in Syria, maybe taking that individual perspective and seeing how the individuals there are faring and what can be done to help maybe just a few people if you can't completely solve the issue. But I do think that both approaches are necessary.
Diverse teams outperform teams composed of the very best individuals. This has been proven. This is a heavy topic now. President Obama used innovation 9 times in the State of the Union address. So share with us perhaps a personal experience where you witnessed this play out, maybe in your teaming, in your report outs, in your studies, in your global studies.
As a part of the Alternate Break program, one of our huge focuses is incorporating diversity into our trips. So when we begin the interview process and picking the students that we're going to go on these trips with, we really look for diversity amongst them, whether it be through race, their their progress and how terms they are involved in the world, how much service they do. And so we do this because throughout the trip, when we're talking with these individuals, we want to have as many perspectives as we can. And so last year, and even this year on a trip, we had so much diversity within the group that every single time we spoke, somebody said, I used to think this way, and I no longer do. Or, you know, I never once thought that that could be the case. Or there was just so much enlightenment because we had all of these different perspectives. And I feel like when you don't include that diversity, you're really kind of, you're stalling the progress that could be obtained. So I think that that's...
Yeah, exactly.
An experience that I've had, not only in the classroom, but working with a global learning organization called GlobeMed, it really emphasized how multidisciplinary and multicultural not only different aspects of the world are, but issues are. Like, for example, the determinants of health. So it's really important to consider the determinants of health as a multidisciplinary issue and a multidisciplinary factor, because it is not just having access to a doctor, it is not just having access to a prescription, it's having access to proper nutrition, a proper environment, a proper ecosystem. So I think it's really important to really emphasize the not only the cultural diversity that should be posed in the dialogue, but also the multidisciplinary aspect of things that, because I feel as though even though we're all in our specific fields and we're all studying different things, they all interrelate in some way or another, not only health-wise, but in political science, but in all of these different issues that should be tackled from all directions, not only culturally, but disciplinary.
So I guess the Model United Nations team is a great representative of this. One of the things that we do when we recruit is we look for diversity. It doesn't necessarily have to be racial or ethnic or cultural diversity, but at least a diversity in backgrounds. Because what we found is that when we go send people to conferences, which is what we do, we'll go compete at a conference like at Harvard or University of Pennsylvania. There'll be different committees that each person is in. And if everybody is a international relations major or a political science major, what we find is that we have either the same ideas replicated over and over and over, or just a paucity of ideas in general. So what we do now is we recruit from all different majors, so people with different interests, and we recruit from different backgrounds. And that's a very intentional thing that we do. So for instance, if we have a person representing somebody in the Economic and Financial Committee of the UN, if we don't have somebody with an economic or finance major on the team, how are we going to get that perspective? Another committee that often is represented is the Social and Humanitarian and Culture Committee, and they discuss things like human rights abuses in prisons. So if we don't have a criminal justice person on the team, or at least somebody who has a background with the law, and that can be firsthand in the case of some of our delegates, that really proves to be a limitation for us. So we've kind of seen that firsthand. We're competing against teams like Harvard and Yale and Georgetown, and I guarantee, those teams are very homogenous. They have a certain type of person. Ivy League schools recruit a certain type of person, and they say that they seek diversity. But when we go compete, FIU, the international really stands out because we are a truly international team. I think over 50% of our delegates come from a different country. And we have a total of, I think, three. This is reflective of the overall population. This isn't intentional, but we have about three white people on our team. So when we travel to these schools, it really is an international delegation, and that's helped us. We're ranked 5th in the country right now. So, and this is one of the few things where we can actually put a score and say, yeah, diversity does do better, because we don't have necessarily the backgrounds that these Ivy Leaguers have. We didn't get 2,400 on our SAT, and we didn't get a 4.0 coming out of a private high school. But what we do have is diversity and a diversity of perspectives, and that really, really does help.
I'm very grateful to this university. Not only am I a student here, I also work for the university. I handle several USAID grants. Kind of scary to think I handle $15 million. It scares me. So coming with that, I'm usually, so with these grants, it's several international grants. We have one in Tanzania and Kenya, Rwanda, and several countries in West Africa. And I'm usually, the younger one of the team. I handle the financial administrative issues of these projects. So I come in, with these people that have already these established mentalities. This is what we're going to do. This is how we do things. And I come in, and in a personal experience, I feel that that helps me, stand my ground. Even though, I may not have decades of experience, but I come in with a different perspective. I come in trying to shake things up a little bit. Sometimes you need to think outside this box, like Mark was saying. I mean, sometimes you need that, that person that doesn't look like the rest of the team, that's not like the rest of the team. In my particular project, I worked in Tanzania and in Kenya, and I've been fortunate enough to go to these places and see what we're doing. And for me, that was, as cliche as it sounds, life-changing. I mean, I got to see just like Tracy was saying with her alternative spring break experience, I got to see the conditions that these people are working in. I got to see the work that we're doing. We deal with different water issues in these countries: sanitation, hygiene, water quality. So I got to see, not only am I looking at, when I'm here, the numbers, oh, they bought this, they did that. I get to see actually the work in the field. And that, for me, makes me work harder and makes me kind of want to go that extra mile for these people that I didn't understand before. And as we were saying, sometimes just seeing someone else that's different makes a big, it makes a big difference in what you do in your everyday life, and it changes your perspective. I mean, I thought poverty was something to be ashamed of, or it's something that, I thought, oh, if you don't have, a roof over your head, you're poor. No, some people in the world live like that, and to them that's not poverty, that's their quality of life. There's a difference between quantity and quality. And I've been able to see that not only through my job here at FIU, but also in my classes. And as a lot of my colleagues were saying, to debating that in class, having that open dialogue in classes, or even in your extracurricular activities, I think that's pivotal and important. And in my case, I've been very, very fortunate to have mentors that actually tell me, to help me broaden my horizons. I came with a background in political science. I thought, political science, oh, that's just something that, the United Nations does. That's just something international relations. That has nothing to do with the real world. I was very fortunate to have a mentor to say, you know what, that actually goes into a lot of other fields. And that's how I got interested in environmental studies, and now I'm doing environmental economics. I'm doing resource management. That's what I'm seeing in my classes and in my research. So my experience was kind of like the opposite. How does my international experience go into the real world? Because being a political scientist, it's not like a real job. Like how do you concrete that? How do you bring that, other than being a diplomat or working for the Department of State? What else can you do with that? And I think that's very important when you're talking about global learning and having a global perspective.
And so if we want to be able to understand an issue, a topic, a class in its entirety, we have to incorporate these different perspectives. If not, we're really only tackling such a limited aspect of it. So, for example, Tracy and I were talking about earlier, at FIU we're really fortunate because we have such a large international student population that what we think would be a really good idea is if we learn to offer some type of program or something to incorporate these students into giving us their experiences that they have from other countries and other backgrounds. So maybe like in a class, if we're talking about an issue, we could kind of bring a real life perspective into it and ask an international student who may be knowledgeable on that topic to come in and talk to the class. And that would kind of just really, bring to life that personal perspective to us outside of the books and outside of just the content of reading and talking about it.
I'd just like to add that it's great that you get different perspectives from everybody all over the world and that you learn from different experiences, but there's absolutely nothing like actually getting out there and experiencing it yourself, or actually meeting somebody that inspires you to want to go out there and meet something new or learn something about the world that you haven't before. that perspective will alone change as you go through that experience, as you interconnect with others. And I think that brings you an experience that it's more marketable than anything else, because at an interview or any other type of experience that you will go through, having something that you can connect to with that person, apart from just your studies, because the textbook is great, but saying, yeah, I touched the soil, gives you another perspective onto what you bring into that workplace. So I feel that actually interacting with the experiences or communications that you've heard from other people and saying, yeah, I've gone through that too, kind of brings us all together in a different way.
So do you find when you're listening to the news or you're hearing about some of these world events that are challenging us now, are you less dismissive of it as something that's over there and now it's beginning to entertain having a dialogue with the situation because of your experiences?
I just feel that being a criminal justice major, you really learn how manipulative the media can be. So you learn to want to go beyond just what you see. So just reading, you can read many articles. Some may even be pulled away for certain reasons. But I just feel that you can never be too sure, and there's no eyes like your own to go through anything. So I would never just confine or what I see.
The last question I would like to add, because it's been very worrying for me, the whole situation happening in Crimea and Russia and Ukraine, because I lived in the city right 80 kilometers from Ukraine, near Kharkiv, where the whole thing is going on right now. And I've lived there since 7 years old, so I know people. I know Ukrainian people, I know Russian people, and they've been brother, countries for as long as the history has been together. And to be honest, I've been so alarmed by the kind of propaganda that I see from both sides of the mass communications. The Russian media is extremely pro-Putin, which is extremely bad, but at the same time the BBC, one of the most valuable for me sources of information, has been a huge propaganda, and they've been putting articles about history that trying to put everything in a bad light. So it's good for me that I've been there and I know there, and it's good for me that I've been there. I know what psychology the mass media has in the West as well, because now I understand that what the whole situation created there is an artificial situation. On the basic level of people communication, people don't want to do any fights. To be honest, nobody cares about Crimea and Russia, if Crimea would be part of Russia or not. It's something that's been elevated to such an extent that, to be honest, I'm coming from, as a lay person living back there, I'm glad that I have that perspective seen from there, so I can discuss with people, and people start saying, oh no, we need to go invade Russia, or Russia needs to do that, but we don't need to do that. We just need to stop the politicians from both sides to make a mistake that they've been making so far, because both of the sides have been escalating the situation out of the way that it's supposed to be. And coming back to, I also wanted to add, one of the things that been probably the best international experience for myself is learning languages. I think the only way to completely immerse yourself and understand the soul of a different culture is to learn the language, at least to a basic level, to see how people think, because people think through the words they say and through the words they express to their, to their loved ones, to the way they express their ideas. We had one class with Dr. Gardinian present here in the conference, that we talked about how the word mama is expressed in one of the African countries. We have from a fellow student from Sudan. And it's interesting enough, they refer to mama as to all the women in the tribe, in the village, because they're raised commonly by all the women in the village. So for them, mama doesn't have the same meaning as for us. We call one person a mama. And it's something was very revealing for me, because I would never be able to understand before that I can call somebody else such an intimate term as my mother, as a whole women in the tribe. And it's something good to understand, because now I see that, in some countries, raising children is a common responsibility. All women serve as the face of a common mother for everybody in the same village. So probably one of the things that I would definitely see as the best experience for the students in college, and especially in the public schools, K through 12, is language learning. Not only one language, foreign language, that is not even properly taught not even in the United States or everywhere around the world. But we need to immerse our children in ourselves and as multiple languages as we can, even if at the basic level.
I think to add to what Alejandra was saying, and really to just go back to your point about international awareness and international interest, we really have to focus on individual empathy. I was talking previously with all of the panelists, is that I am really astounded at how indifferent our generation is, and how apathetic we are to one another, and let alone to anything that's happening outside of our immediate community. And to really work from the ground up, right, to get to the point where we care what's happening in Crimea, to get to the point where we care what's happening in South Africa or in other tumultuous parts of the world, we have to start here at home. And something that I would really wish to see more of are professors inculcating in their students a sense of community, of wanting to help, of wanting to develop this sort of like feeling and a sense of humanity and shared suffering with one another. You know, encourage community service at a very local level. You don't have to go abroad because there's a lot of suffering and poverty going on in our own backyards, right? If we don't have that empathy now, we can't possibly care about or think about or be skeptical about international issues or awareness. So, for instance, internships are great. I started interning at the state attorney's office and the public defender's office, and particularly in the human trafficking division, and in crime courts and misdemeanors. You never really understand someone's struggle until you actually are there living it with them. You know, I had the opportunity of meeting with child prostitutes and a lot of displaced immigrants, and that really created in me a sense of caring. You know, I wanted to sort of stand next to that person and tell them it was going to be all right. If I didn't have that then, if I didn't spend my time trying to cultivate my emotional IQ, I couldn't possibly stand here and tell you that I want diversity in my experiences in classrooms, that I want to know what's happening in the world and how that's affecting other people. Because if we don't start now at a very personal level, here, in our schools, in our shelters, in our neighborhoods, we can't possibly care what's happening outside. And I think that there's a serious deficit in how much we, as young people, care about each other and about ourselves. And that really needs to be attended to immediately for any real change to happen. Small steps, but I think it's worth noting.
I kind of want to piggyback off of that. I think service learning is perhaps the most important and best way to do exactly what you were just talking about. Like I said, I've been a part of Alternative Breaks, and I've been on 5 trips, and most of them have been in the United States. And I have learned so much more about psychology and about criminal justice and all the issues that you discuss within those 2 disciplines on my trips within the United States and outside of the United States. And I've also been able to develop that emotional IQ because you spend time with people. And in Miami particularly, there are a lot of issues that relate to all the disciplines. There are a lot of organizations that somehow, some way will touch on whatever topic a particular class is covering. And if we can incorporate service learning projects into classes, our education and what the students at this university are going to take away with them when they walk that stage and they graduate is going to be 100 times better, more effective, and applicable and salient to them for the rest of their lives. Because I've learned about poverty through stories, working with the homeless children, homeless families in the United States and outside of the United States. And it was an issue I originally didn't feel particularly passionate about. And we talk a lot about how does poverty affect development in children, for instance. And I never understood it really until I saw it, until I was able to interact with 9-month-old children, 3-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and 17-year-olds who at different points and for different lengths of time in their life had been affected by it. So I think it would be innovative and completely revolutionary to education if every class or every discipline had at least one class in the curriculum that requires that type of project.
Well, it was the great Shirley Chisholm who told us service is the rent you pay to live on earth. So, and I think that's that's a perfect note to end on. I think we're out of time. I'm so impressed with you. I have no doubt that you're going to go out and make sure in my lifetime that we unify the Korean Peninsula. I have no worries whatsoever, so what a privilege.
Please join me in thanking our incredibly articulate student panel and our moderator. And just have to comment that if you were here earlier, you heard one of the quotes that Dr. Nguyen shared with us, that there is no neutral education. It's not happenstance that these individuals express these ideas and recount these experiences. This is the purpose of global learning for global citizenship. This is what we do at FIU. This is how we educate. And I know that Hillary will recall with me, we will never forget the moment we sat in front of the committee, our reaccrediting body, which said, we don't think it's a good idea that you call your initiative Global Learning for Global Citizenship. It's too controversial. We said, it's not controversial. This is in our DNA. This is what we want to do and we have wanted to do since our founding at FIU.